Ciao amici dell'altra Genesi, oggi sono veramente emozionata nel presentarvi un'intervista esclusiva ed eccezionale in occasione di questo centenario. Abbiamo il grandissimo onore di avere ospite Janet Sitchin, che è la nipote del nostro rinomato beniamino Zaccaria Sitchin. Welcome among us, Janet. It's a greatest honor for me to interview you today on behalf of the biggest and most renowned Italian group based on Zaccaria Sitchin theories. So many thanks to be with us today.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to interview me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So Janet, I always been curious about the relationship with your uncle. Do you remember his first step, his first travel, his first studies? Did your family members support his works?
So they did support his work. Now, we lived in a different city, so I didn't know a lot about what he was doing until he published the first book. And my father always spoke to him in Hebrew, and I don't speak Hebrew. So, if they were talking about this, they were probably talking about this for years, and I just didn't really know, and my dad didn't mention it. But my dad has a PhD in aeronautical and mechanical engineering, so he did do some calculations. There was a lot of discussion between the two of them all the time.
Sorry, Janet, I think I cannot see you anymore. Is the connection?
I'm still,
You can look at me.
Okay,
I can see you now.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like
me to start over with the question? Yeah.
Please, thank you.
Okay, so yes, my family supported him. We lived in different cities, so I didn't know much about what he was doing until he published the first book. But my father always spoke to him frequently, but they spoke in Hebrew, so I didn't know what they were talking about. My father is a PhD in mechanical and aeronautical engineering, so he did some calculations on the orbit of Nibiru for my uncle. So I know they were talking about it quite a bit, and even probably before the first book. And his own family, one of the famous quotes was from my aunt, and it was, stop talking and start writing. So she definitely supported what he was doing, with writing and wanting him to write the books.
Right. So that's excellent. So Mr. Amnon was speaking in Hebrew with him, and they probably were talking about this. You suppose they were talking about his studies and his calculations.
Right. I mean, I'm sure they talked about a lot of things, but yes, yeah. I know they spent time talking about this too. Because after I became aware of what my uncle was doing and how my father was helping, I know they were talking about it. But before that, I didn't know.
So, sure, of course, because of the Hebrew languages that they were talking in Hebrew like that. Okay, great. How did you first approach your uncle's work? We know that you were his favorite nephew. Were you skeptic? Were you curious? Maybe because you got passion for the topic, or maybe because you just attended one of his seminars around the world?
Well, I first became aware of the book, when my dad said he published a book, and I didn't necessarily know what it was about. But he came to Detroit. He did a lot of interviews when the first book came out, The 12th Planet, and he came to Detroit, which is where we lived, and he did an interview on a talk show that was there. So he visited us, of course, and I got a copy of his book. And I think by that time, the book was available in paperback. So I got a paperback version of The 12th Planet. And I was a teenager, so I read a little bit, but I was busy with school, and I didn't really, my opinion on The 12th Planet is the first 100 pages, it's difficult. Yeah. You have to be studious and you have to be intent to get through it. But once you get through that, and when I reread it, I didn't feel this way. But the first time I felt like you really needed to give your full attention. And I wasn't ready to do that at that point in time in my life. But once you get past those 100 pages, it's fascinating, and you can't put it down, except that you have to read a little bit and absorb it, and another little bit and absorb it because of the type of material. But at the time that I got the book, I really wasn't ready to do that. So it wasn't until much later that I started reading his books. And I became aware that he was doing seminars in different cities. So I went to the seminar mostly because I wanted to spend more time with my uncle. And then I became very interested in the topic. I met a lot of his readers that were attending the seminars, and some of them had gone on travels with him, and they were very warm people. They're all very intelligent. They're all different levels of education and different types of employment and walks of life, but they all had a passion for this, and I became friends with many of them, and still even now. So
wow.
So I started going to all the seminars and assisting. I was there, so of course I was going to help in anything that needed to be done. So
great. Oh, wow. Oh, that's really great. That's really fascinating from our point of view. So we know that Zachariah Sitchin left us, and what he left us is just priceless for us. He wrote over 14 books, translated in more than 20 languages around the world. And we just love all his works, all his studies. Really what is fascinating me is Queen Puabi subject. You know that I live in London. I've been in the British Museum many, many times just to admire these amazing jewels. But do you think that Sitchin theory on Nin Puabi as an Anunnaki could be like a scary truth for the scientific communities, even nowadays? Why do you think that the National History Museum denied to Sitchin the permission for further examination on Queen Puabi?
We actually did get permission to take a sample,
okay.
And we had engaged kind of through a third party. There was a man who was very supportive of my uncle, and my uncle had given him the mission basically to get the DNA sample taken care of. So he was taking care of that, and I think there was maybe some hope that we would find genes for longevity or something in Puabi's genes. So he hired somebody to do the DNA study. And it's a well-known person who does DNA, but I think I don't think he believed in what we were trying to do. So he did it and wasn't really thrilled about doing it. And maybe in his scientific community, maybe they made fun of him. I don't know. But his heart wasn't in it. But he got a sample, and it wasn't a good sample. I mean, the DNA is very old. And so getting a good sample, and I think they were really wanting to limit, the museum had to supervise what they were doing, and they did not get a good sample. So it was either too meager of a sample, but it didn't show anything. They did do the DNA study, but since it was a poor sample, they didn't get anything conclusive, and they didn't find anything unusual in it. Now, again, I don't think that they were trying very hard. I think they were just going through the motions and doing what they had to do. But we didn't get a good study, and it was so hard to get that. We didn't try again. Maybe we should at some point. But my own opinion about the DNA is that even if Nin Puabi was an Anunnaki, was a particular Anunnaki in the book There Were Gods Upon the Earth that Zechariah wrote, one of the last ones that he considered part of the Earth Chronicles. He mentioned that he thought which Anunnaki person it was, and that they were one of the few that actually died and were buried on Earth, because most of them went back to Nibiru before they passed away. My feeling is, even if she was an Anunnaki, when they mixed their genes with ours, or with the hominids, we already got their genes. So if you look at and study the human genome, we probably have their genes. The question is, we have so many different genes, but not all of them are active. Look at our DNA sequence. Some people have different illnesses because they have a gene, or they're protected from an illness because they have a gene. And it's whether it's active or not. We all have those genes, but it's whether it's enabled. So I'm thinking that we probably have all the genes of the Anunnaki from that initial mixture of hominid and Anunnaki. We should have all the genes. It's just whether it's active or knowing which ones. I mean, I guess the real thing with Nin Puabi was if we could study her genes, and we study the human genes, and we see which ones are active, we do a DNA study in comparison, we might find surprising ones that are typically not active in humans. not that they're not present in humans, but they're not active. Yeah. And we see that they were somehow switched on in her. I mean, I don't know how geneticists indicate this, but there's something in the DNA that they can tell. And if we study the ones that she has active that we typically do not, that's where we might find the difference. Not that they're missing ones, but just which ones are active.
We really think about this as well, and we really agree with you, with your opinion. We really think that there might be something that is already in us, but is not active anymore. The DNA, we got so many studies and authors in our group that are studying the subject as well. So you never know what is going on within the next few years, what is going to happen. You know that there's a group which strongly supports Zachariah Sitchin theories and his explanation of human origins, including the ancient astronaut theory. We truly believe that we are rediscovering ancient knowledges. What's your position on these topics?
So there's a surprising amount of knowledge that the Sumerians and other ancient people had. And as we know, there's no way that they could have known about astronomy and all kinds of other things on their own. We didn't even discover Pluto until 1930. So how could ancient people with no telescopes or anything else know about that celestial body, whether we consider it a planet? I still consider it a planet, but even if scientific community demoted it.
But we do strongly believe in it.
Yes. But so they knew about the outer planets, and how could they know that? And how could they know so many other things that, and how did the Sumerian people figure out education and law and mathematics and agriculture and all of these many different things just out of nowhere? I mean, it just, in a blink, it was there. And so what they said is that everything we know, the Anunnaki taught us. So this is something that my uncle found in things that they wrote down, that it's who are the Anunnaki? And Anunnaki is Sumerian for those who from heaven to earth came, or those who came from above. So it's, how did, how do they know everything? Because the Anunnaki told them. So they knew an incredible amount, and there were all kinds of things, even if you talk about some things that they didn't have words for, but ways of communication over long distance. You look at cell phones today, you look at all kinds of things that the Mies that had all knowledge on it, and you look at a cell phone and you have the internet and you have everything. So there must be technology that they had. They had personal craft, like spacecraft, like little helicopters or pods or something, flying cars, whatever you want to call it. They had something that they, individual Anunnaki, could travel from place to place. And we don't have anything flying as far as personal vehicles, other than, the very rich might have a helicopter. But these are things that we're making technological advancements very quickly, and they may have had these for a long time, and of course, since perfected them much more than we could. So
absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. I always imagine Zachariah Sitchin as a meticulous and yet a demanding professor. Would you like to share with our other aspects of his personalities that would help us to connect a little bit more with the person rather than the author?
He was a very warm person. So, a lot of the people that have met him in person really know how genuine he was. He cared about people. He had great affection for, he called them his fans, the closest ones that traveled with him. And, he made a lot of personal friendships and did a lot to make every one of them feel important when they were on trips with him. He was funny too. He had a dry sense of humor. He wasn't a stand-up comedian or anything, but he, you would see the twinkle in his eye or the twitch of his mustache or something like that. And he would make a few jokes here and there, but So.
What a great honor to know him in person, honestly. So being so close to a man with such a personality, breathing his studies and his researches every day, has somehow changed your life?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be talking to you today without this, or the book, the Anunnaki Chronicles, that I did get a little bit of attention for doing some of that, or people learned about me at that point. But just even going to the seminars and meeting the people, that was really important in some of those friendships. But also the topic itself. I mean, there's so many people, when I have met somebody and they say, "Oh, Sitchin, are you related to Zecharia Sitchin?" They tell me stories about how it's changed their life and how it's questions that they've always had. It made the pieces fit together, and it really is amazing what my uncle did, that he took so many disciplines. It's not just that he read the tablets and interpreted them. He also studied genetics and all the, astronomy and all these other disciplines to pull the pieces together to see, what is it that they said. And he traveled places and took tours so that you could see the evidence. It wasn't just something he wrote in a book that didn't have anything he wrote. He had 10 pieces of proof for it. Even the first book, he told the story about, he put in so much proof because he wanted people to believe him and to have it be scholarly and taken seriously. And
we know internet. He didn't have any internet, so such a huge work.
Right. So he really wanted to make sure that there was proof. And so people have said, this really changed everything, because I finally have the answers. I mean, I went through religion and it kind of stops short, and and then science doesn't really answer either. But, when I look at what Zecharia has done and pulled together so many disciplines of information, he's answered all the questions, right. Or at least enough of them that it makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, question that makes sense more. Well, he left us so many things, so many studies, and really was an amazing person. You know that we are here today because to celebrate his centennial anniversary. You are extending Zachariah's legacy, and we just cannot thank you enough for what you're doing, honestly. Are you aware of more material not yet published about these studies? Would you reserve us, let's say, a surprise in the future?
I'm hoping so. So a lot of the material, he meant for it to go to, he created a foundation, and there's some family members that are on the board, including myself. And he intended the materials from his work to go to the foundation, but it's not really how it happened. One of his daughters kind of took everything from the apartment. And it's only more recently that we've gotten access to some of it, but a lot of it was unfortunately thrown away. So it's really, it's really heartbreaking that happened. So there is still some things, and that's actually the book, the Anunnaki Chronicles, and some of the material that had been unpublished at that time came from that stockpile of information. And there are notes from the trips that when he took groups on trips, he did extensive notes and talked to everybody about what they were about to see, and he gave them trip notes. So I'm looking at seeing if there's some way we can make those available. So that's going to take a little bit of time to put that together and to see if the publisher wants to publish it or what we want to do with it. But that's something that I have in mind. So that would help people. If they go to Baalbek, then they know what they're looking at, or which museums to go to, or those kinds of things.
We are missing him very, very much. So everything that could be available, we just, would be so happy to have it, to read it through. And thank you so much for everything. So thank you so much for your time, Janet. Thank you so much for those answers. But thank you so much for all you're doing in memory of our favorite author, Zecharia Sitchin. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.